Going to be that bad. Good morning, everyone. Can I welcome you to the sixth meeting of the 2013 meeting of the Infrastructure and Capital Investment Committee. Can I remind everyone to switch off their mobile phones and Blackberries and any devices which may affect the broadcasting system. We have apologies this morning from Margaret McCulloch. Agenda item 1 is a decision on taking business in private. Can I seek the agreement of the committee to take agenda item 3 in private to allow us to consider potential issues of subsidiarity around the European Union document as listed on the agenda? Are members agreed? Agreed. That is agreed. Agenda item 2 is the Forth Replacement Crossing, update number 5. We have here from the Forth Replacement Crossing team, David Climie, Project Director, and Lauren Shackman, Project Manager. Can I welcome you both to the committee again? Would you like to make any opening remarks, gentlemen?
Yes, I would, thank you. I'm pleased to be able to report continuing good progress on all aspects of work for the Forth Replacement Crossing since our last appearance before the committee in September 2012. In particular, 3 of the 4 contracts have now been completed successfully, and progress on the principal contract for the main crossing and approach roads continues on time and on budget. On the Fife ITS contract, the 18 gantries were installed during September and October last year, and following the final testing and commissioning, the system went fully operational on the 4th of December. This has involved the use of variable mandatory speed limits during periods of traffic congestion and southbound bus hard shoulder running from Junction 3 at Halbeath to Junction 1 at Admiralty. The opening of the scheme was preceded by extensive bus driver training and a public information campaign on how the scheme operates. On the M9 Junction 1A contract, work progressed extremely well during the autumn. The significant paving works that we mentioned at our last appearance here were completed over 4 weekends during October and November, rather than the 6 that had originally been anticipated. This good progress meant that we were able to remove all the lane restrictions and also to open the westbound slip road to the M9 towards Stirling just before the Christmas holidays. Following the completion of the outstanding minor works during January, the 40-mile-an-hour speed restriction was removed and the junction was fully open to traffic by the Transport Minister on the 1st of February, 2 months ahead of the contract schedule. Once again, the scheme involves the use of variable mandatory speed limits during periods of traffic congestion and bus hard shoulder running southbound from the M9 spur down to the Newbridge roundabout. The third contract to be completed is the Contact and Education Centre located in the Feta car park on the south side of the Forth Road Bridge. The Minister for Transport visited the exhibition area on the 21st of January, and we've also held 7 sessions of project update meetings there for the media, for elected representatives, key stakeholders and members of the public. Those took place on January the 30th and the 31st. Feedback from these sessions was generally very positive, and the CEC is fully open for bookings now by interested groups, and the Traffic Scotland Control Centre, with part of the building, is expected to become operational later this spring. Finally, turning to the principal contract, on the north side, the final blast at Winnie Hill took place on the 1st of March, and material from there has continued to be moved to the Ferrytoll embankment, which is now over 50% constructed. 2 new bridges crossing the Rosyth Railway branch line in the Ferrytoll area are nearly complete, and the realignment of the B981 from North Queensferry and also Castle and Hill Road from Rosyth away from the Ferrytoll roundabout are on target to be completed during this year. And it's a requirement of the contract that the work on those 2 local roads has to be complete in advance of any work requiring traffic management on the A90 main road. In addition, on the north side, excavation for the North Bridge abutment is continuing, and the foundation for the land-based pier of N2 has been cast. On the south side, the foundations for the approach viaduct piers S7 and S8 on the land have been completed, and the excavation for the south abutment and the assembly area for the south approach viaduct steelwork have been completed in Eckland Field. Excavation work for the South Queensferry Junction is continuing, and that should be completed in the next couple of weeks, and that will then be followed by the construction of the roundabout and 2 overbridges during this year. This work is being carried out largely offline in order to minimise any disruption to traffic on the A904. And it's expected that the A904 will be rerouted onto the new alignment through the roundabout in the spring of 2014. On the marine side of things, there's been a huge amount of activity which can be seen taking place in the Forth, with barges, floating cranes and other marine plant being used at the various foundation locations. The Centre Tower foundation on Beamer Rock is the most advanced, with the 10 sections of cofferdam having been placed between November and January. The inside of the cofferdam has now been sealed, and we're preparing to dewater the inside of it to give us dry working conditions to construct the centre tower base concrete. Installation of a tower crane will commence in the next couple of weeks, and that will progressively climb higher as the tower leg is constructed over the next 18 months. The north and south tower caissons have been sunk to the design positions, and the bottom edges have been jet grouted to allow the final excavation to bedrock to take place. The rock surface will then be cleaned in advance of pouring the underwater concrete plugs, which will seal the bottom of the caissons and then allow the water inside to be pumped out down to minus 14 metre level, again to give a dry working area for the construction of the reinforced concrete tower foundations. So by the end of this year, all 3 towers will be clearly visible as they climb towards their 210 metre finished height, which is 50 metres higher than the towers of the existing Forth Road Bridge. The final one of the 3 caissons, which is located at Pier S1 on the south side, that's still being sunk into the bed of the Forth. Has just over 4 metres to go to reach the final design level, and that work will be completed in April. And rectangular steel cofferdams have been installed at the approach pier locations N1, S5 and S4 by floating crane, and these are currently being sealed and prepared for dewatering. And at the seawall at Port Edgar, a temporary bund and sheet piles have been installed to create a dry area for construction of Pier S6. Fabrication of the approach viaduct deck steelwork will commence at Cleveland Bridge in Darlington in April, with the first deliveries to the South Assembly area expected to start in the summer. And fabrication of the cable stay bridge steelwork is progressing well in China, and the first shipment is due to arrive in Rosyth in early 2014. So to summarise, 3 of the 4 contracts are complete and operational. The 4th contract is progressing well, with 2013 seeing the transition from underwater to above water works on the main crossing. Overall, the project continues to progress on time and on budget, and we continue to expect to have the whole project open by late 2016.
Lawrence, do you want to add anything? Or no?
No, I don't think so at this stage, thank you.
Okay. As both members and witnesses will be aware, the committee consulted local community representatives in advance of this session, asking for comments on the process of community engagement and for any issues of concern that have arisen in relation to the project. So members will be asking questions in that area. But can I start off by asking if you could highlight some of the key events that are likely to occur in the next 6 months, which will be of interest to Parliament. I went to a meeting at the university, which was very technical about the bridge, but very interesting. And I understand that the concrete pour is something that is a very tricky operation that has to be got right. So are there particular weather conditions and things like that that have to be right for this to happen successfully?
Yes, there are. I mean, there are a number of challenges that are ahead. What has been very encouraging is in the last month, when we've had pretty calm weather conditions, we've been able to make very, very good progress. Because one of the key things that affects the work, particularly the marine work, is wind. Because when the wind gets up, that makes the water very rough in the Forth, and therefore it can be difficult either to get workforce or materials out to the marine working areas. And that's one of the key areas that we have to keep a close eye on. And obviously we monitor weather forecasts very carefully. But during the next 6 months, it's very much a transition from the underwater operations. We want to get those prepared and complete. And particular key areas that we have to make sure of are when we complete all the excavation and clean the rock, to make sure that we have a very clean rock surface there in advance of pouring this underwater concrete. The last thing we want is to have dirt and material that shouldn't be there between the underwater concrete that we're going to pour and the rock. We want to have a good key there. But in terms of the concreting operation itself, as you heard, yes, they are large concrete pours. The largest one is on the South Tower, and that involves about 18,000 cubic metres of concrete, and that will be a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week operation, which is going to take about 10 days. Now, we've established our own concrete batching plant in Rosyth in order to make sure that we control our own destiny in terms of the supply of the concrete. So all the concrete itself will be produced within the Forth Ports area at Rosyth. We then have 4 separate barges, each of which has 6 concrete mixers on it, which we can progressively load up, and then they will be transiting backwards and forwards about the 3 kilometres from the quayside at Rosyth out to the caissons. So we'll be looking for a weather window of between 7 and 10 days in order to carry out that work at the South Tower. We do have an advantage in the fact that we'll be doing some preliminary work, as I mentioned, on the approach viaduct piers, like S4 and S5. Those have much smaller concrete pours, so we can use them to make sure all the logistics work, that the cleaning is good, and that we've established all the correct procedures. So by the time we come to do the South Tower concrete pour, which is the largest in the summer, we should be very well prepared for that.
Okay, and I understand there were embankment difficulties by North Queensferry that you didn't quite expect. Can you give us a bit more detail about those?
I think it's not a case that they weren't expected. We had the Ferrytown embankment itself, which is the largest to be built in Scotland, goes across a number of areas, different areas of ground. There are 7 different sets of ground conditions that exist under the viaduct, under the embankment. Beg your pardon. Partly there's the old St Margaret's Marsh. There's reclaimed land there between what used to be the old coastline and the new coastline. There's some areas of contaminated lands that we have to dig out and replace. And there's also some areas where we have to put additional stabilisation into the ground to make sure that when the embankment settles, it settles evenly. So I think the uncertainty that existed was just exactly how extensive each of those particular areas was, and particularly the interface between those areas. That was always a challenge to find out when you actually start doing it, just where those interfaces are and what that means in terms of the number of piles that have to be put in or the amount of soil that has to be replaced. So I think it was a known uncertainty, if you like. That we knew there were going to be issues there, and it was a case of meeting those challenges as we've progressed. And things generally are progressing well in that area.
Okay. Gordon.
Briggs and Queensferry Community Council have both raised concerns about the Transport Scotland's response to several flooding incidents relating to the project. Can you explain what flood risk assessment was undertaken prior to the project starting, and what was the flood risk mitigation put in place?
The contractor's duty bound to have a management plan for dealing with a lot of aspects of the project, and obviously dealing with drainage issues is one of those. And as the project progresses, obviously the drainage can be instigated across the site, whether that's temporary or permanent drainage, or using permanent drainage in a temporary solution. And I think in terms of the flooding issues which we discussed at the last committee meeting, it was at a stage of the project where a lot of the works were just starting up, and unfortunately there was a period of sustained intense rainfall which affected a lot of, not just South Queensferry, but a lot of the central belt of Scotland. And I think the incidents which perhaps Briggs and Queensferry are alluding to were the events which happened around that particular time. And suffice it to say that drainage measures were starting to be implemented across the project, but they weren't fully complete at that particular stage. They were shortly after that period put into play, and there's been no incidents of drainage problems since.
Yeah, I mean, I understand that there was 9 flooding incidents since the project started, 6 of them taking place between the period June 2012 and August 2012. Now, I'm well aware that the weather was bad last year, but as a former resident of South Queensferry of 20 years, I'm aware that there has been virtually no flooding in that area prior to the project starting, going back to the early 1980s. So, I mean, you know, while I accept there was some bad weather last year, you know, I'm a bit concerned that everything seems to point to this project starting, and possibly that there was no adequate risk assessment carried out in the first place in relation to flooding.
Well, I think that one of the issues as well is that the A904 has a history of, as I understand it from talking with City of Edinburgh Council, who are responsible for the A904, of not being in the best of conditions, and indeed I believe that there's plans for them to reconstruct a lot of the A904 around in the proximity of the crossing, or the approach roads to the crossing, in the not too distant future, in recognition of the fact that the road condition is not as it should be, and particularly the drainage as well. So I think basically coming back to the problems which were obviously very regrettable, and we have obviously the deepest sympathy for the people that were affected by those works or those incidents. Matters conspired, if you like, to cause the problems which ordinarily we wouldn't have expected to have happened.
There was a comment in the South Forum from Ewan MacDonald saying that the best estimates of drainage work completion is towards the end of 2013, start of 2014. Does that mean that if we have a bad summer, as we had last year, that householders in the Echlin area of South Queensferry is going to have to suffer flooding again?
I think that the risk of flooding is very, very minimal now, because there's a lot of measures been put into play. There are temporary holding basins. There's a vast amount of the construction has been excavated south or north of the A904. There's a big excavation for the junction at the A904 which can be used as a sump. There are temporary pumps and outfalls in place to cater for any major drainage event, flooding event.
Okay, thanks for the reassurances.
Okay, Alex.
Thank you, Convener. Concerns have been raised about the impact of mud and dust from the construction vehicles and HGVs, particularly on the A904, Echlin Corner and Lynn Mill areas. What's been done to resolve these problems, including mud and dust deposited on footways?
Well, the contractor has the main contractor is in control of his own subcontractors, and I believe he's sourcing material from the Winchborough Bing, which I think most people will be familiar with, and running road wagons, which is perfectly entitled to do, along the A904 to actually fill the embankment, which David alluded to before at Ferry Toll. So there are a number of wagon movements per day making that journey, and the contractor has been on his subcontractor to make sure that he abides by his planning terms and conditions, i.e. that road wagons must be cleaned, they should be sheeted, all the way from the Bing in Winchborough to the site on the north side of the Forth. Now it appears that one or two wagons haven't had the sheeting properly covered over, or the wagons haven't been completely sheeted properly, and there may have been instances, we believe, where some of the red blaze material which is being imported has been stuck underneath the wagons and has been deposited on the road. And FCBC have been reviewing the contractor have been reviewing their processes to make sure that the minimal amount of material is deposited on the road so that these problems are minimised. I'm not saying that there haven't been some issues with material on the A904. I think that's clear to see, because FCBC have, I think, twice now cleaned the road. But together with the condition of the A904 and the poor drainage, that hasn't helped matters with clearing the material away.
Would it be fair to say then that you're aware of a problem and you're trying to improve that?
That's correct. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned there the fact that lorries are running on the A904. One of the things that's been thrown up by the consultation that we carried out is concern that some of the HGVs associated with the project are driving at excessive speed on the A904. I've also picked up some responses that suggest that some of the drivers are rather aggressive in the way they conduct themselves. Have you identified a problem in that area, and is there anything you can do to prevent that?
Certainly this issue's been raised through the community forums, and we've discussed this with FCBC again to ensure that, as far as they possibly can, their subcontractor is paying due regard to the speed limits, the temporary speed limit in the Echlin area. And we've also informed the traffic management working group, of which the police are a member of that group, about the issue there, and they have undertaken some spot speed checks. Now, of course, enforcement of speed limits is something for the police well, it's their concern. it is a problem, but it is a problem on many other roads as well, and we can only do what we can to try and make sure that the subcontractor adheres to the speed limits. I mean, the ultimate sanction, and I believe that the subcontractor has undertaken this, is to actually sack some of his drivers for disobeying speed limits and not abiding by the sort of good codes of practice which he should be adopting.
Yes. The committee's also heard concerns about adverse impacts of noise and vibration at the Echlin Corner construction site, including concerns about the fact that promised mitigation measures appear not to have been installed. Do you share these concerns, and can you explain why it is that mitigation measures have not been installed?
I think in terms of the noise and vibration, we always knew that there would be a number of issues with it. We have a lot of construction work to do. We're working very close to some areas. We've done a considerable amount of installation of monitoring. We put in place restrictions on noise, which are actually lower than those allowed by the Code of Construction Practice. So within our own employees' requirements to FCBC, we actually lowered all the allowed thresholds by 5 decibels from those that are actually allowed within the Parliamentary Act and the Code of Construction Practice. So we've actually reduced the levels of noise which are allowed within our contract. Having done that, we also have to put in place the monitoring. We do regular monitoring. We have a noise liaison group that meets on a monthly basis, and we review the results of all that monitoring, including any exceedances and also any complaints that we have related to noise. And also we have regular visits by the noise liaison group members, local authority members and so on, to various aspects of the site where there have been activities identified as being potentially a noise creating activity. And those are things like the excavation inside the caissons. When the caissons are hollow, you can get noise if a bucket bangs on the caisson. When rock is excavated, when it's dropped into a barge, when the barge is empty, that can cause some reverberation. So we've installed a lot of protective measures there, such as rubber matting on the barges, putting some timber lining within the barges themselves, to put in additional mitigation to try to make sure that we are using all the best practical means to keep the noise levels down. Having said all that, there have been a small number of complaints, and I should emphasise that it is a small number that have occurred. I think we get averages between 7 and 8 per month in total, the complaints that we're getting. Each of those does have an investigation to make sure that we look into what it is that is causing that noise. In terms of the mitigation, all of the mitigation measures that are required are being progressed. Inevitably, not all of them can be put into place on day one. Some of them take time, particularly where there's a design input involved, and particularly where they're close to existing roads, whereby you have to think about how the traffic management is going to work to actually install these mitigation measures. You don't want to be causing enormous disruption to the road network just to install a small amount of noise mitigation. And certainly in the Echlin Field area, the work there is always progressing down into cuttings, and it's now 9 metres down into the ground. So obviously you have a natural shielding of that noise as it goes further downwards. And certainly the remaining mitigation measures that are outstanding, the discussions are ongoing with the particular residents. Some detailed proposals were put to them within the last week, and it's anticipated that the first part of the additional noise mitigation will be being installed this spring.
So it continues to be a work in progress.
It does, yes.
Yeah. Thank you.
Can I just follow up on that? It seems that Briggs would assert that in terms of speeding vehicles and mud on the road and things, that's got to be reported. It strikes me that that shouldn't have to be the case. It should be, as you say, that the contractor and the subcontractors have got a grip on the situation, that vehicles are washed properly so that mud isn't on the road, and that they adhere to the speed limit. I mean, I'm quite pleased to hear that measures have been taken, even to the extent of sacking people, but that shouldn't really have to happen. That, you know, there should be better supervision by the contractor and the subcontractors, rather than the community feeling all the time that it's their responsibility to have to report it to the police or to yourselves. So, you know, we're going to see a bit of a culture change here.
I don't think it's a culture change. I think it's reinforcing what we are already doing. I completely agree with you. It's not the public's responsibility to police these things. And it's something that we've been pushing extremely hard with FCBC and within our own supervision as well, to make sure that our supervision out on the site are monitoring these things as well and drawing to attention when they're being when things are not being complied with. We actually have a progress meeting with FCBC tomorrow morning. It's one of the key things I will be bringing up with them. Again, it's not a new item. This is something that is brought up on a regular basis. And we've also just recently been working with them to install better wheel washing facilities for the trucks at the ferry toll embankment area, so that when they leave the ferry toll embankment area, they are clean before they actually go back on the roads. Because where FCBC do have a control of it is when the material has been deposited at ferry toll and is then leaving their site and going back onto the public road network. That is absolutely an area that they should control, and we will make sure that they do. Where they need to step up to the mark is at the other end of the supply chain, when the vehicles are actually leaving the Winchborough Bing, because obviously when they're coming fully loaded, to make sure that the best possible conditions are being put in place for vehicles leaving the Winchborough Bing. So it's a two-way push on this. We certainly need to look after our end, and we will continue to do that and increase our efforts on that. But it needs to work at the other end as well, and we're putting whatever pressure we can to make that happen.
The specific issue of the tractor that pulls the fuel supply vehicle.
That's an issue that I was not previously aware of, but I will look into following the information that I've received.
Thanks. Jim.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning, gentlemen. Can I ask you about air quality pollution and air quality monitoring? This is one of the issues that has been highlighted in the Bridge Replacement Interest Group South submission to the committee. During the Fourth Replacement Crossing project objection stage, residents at Eklund fought for proper air quality monitoring to be adopted as an integral part of the FRC project mitigation process, and that Scottish ministers gave undertakings during the passage of the Fourth Crossing Bill that this would in fact happen. My understanding is that the air quality monitoring equipment has not been installed at Eklund Corner. Can you first of all tell us if you agree that that undertaking was given, and if so, why it hasn't been followed through in terms of the installation of the equipment?
All the equipment has been installed, and it's been installed for quite some time. I think at Eklund Corner there was a problem with the monitoring device right on the corner of Eklund Corner, because it was basically agreed that it would be installed in the residents' gardens, and they refused to have that installed, so there was a delay in actually being able to source power supply, etc., as near to that location as possible. So there was a delay in that location. It was really.
So when was it installed then?
I can't tell you off the top of my head, but it's been installed there for quite some time now. We had alternative locations. In fact, I think we've put in monitors, basically in consultation with City of Edinburgh and West Lothian and the community councils as well, in appropriate places, and in some places we've actually put in higher quality monitoring equipment than was actually originally anticipated in the contract. So that what I was trying to get to was, there is a lot of data on air quality. Eklund Corner does have an air quality monitoring device. There's several other monitoring devices around from Eklund Corner, Cloughletts and Springfield along the western edge of Queensferry. And all of the air quality data is gathered by the contractor. It's verified by ourselves, and then everything is published on our website, and generally that's within a month. There was perhaps slightly slow to put it on the website and publish it at the beginning of the contract, because we were just getting up to speed with the monitoring equipment and the output from the data, and making sure that it was in a presentable format for the public.
Colleague wants to come in on this point.
I just want to ask a question. Why was it necessary to put air quality monitoring equipment in gardens when the Eklund area has very wide grass verges adjacent to the road?
It was a commitment and undertaking from the
To put it in somebody's garden?
Yeah.
And also there is the added benefit that if it is in somebody's garden, it's less prone to vandalism or things like that.
There's air quality monitoring equipment throughout Edinburgh, which is adjacent to the road on the pavement.
Yep. Yeah.
I'm just a bit confused about why it would require to be put in a garden when you know, there is quite large expanses of green areas adjacent to the road.
As Lawrence correctly says, there was a specific commitment that it would be in a particular
To
garden.
one particular household.
That's correct, yes.
Right, okay, thanks.
Okay, Gordon, do you want to come back?
Yeah, I just wanted to move on to the community forum. The community forums have been operating for some time now. Can you give us an update on how well you think they're operating?
Sure. We've had quite a number of meetings now. We started off at the early days of the contract. We had the first 3 at 2 monthly intervals, which is more frequent than is required by the Code of Construction Practice, to try and have a bedding down period with all the new people involved in the project and get up to speed with all the issues, as there are normally a lot of issues at the start of a contract. And we've settled down into a 3 monthly format, and we've tried as far as possible to keep the issues at a strategic level, which is what was agreed in the terms of reference with the local community councils and with Briggs as well. And we found that in particularly the North Community Forum has been a fairly even keel forum. We've had a good exchange of views. There haven't been, we've discussed various particular issues, particular strategic issues, as well as giving an information update on the project and a look ahead, particularly in the next 3 months as we've gone through the project. And I think you'll find that, I don't think you got a response from those community councils, which perhaps is an indication that they are pretty content with the process on the north side of the Forth. And that's been going very smoothly. We had a meeting only last week. There was no real problems there. We've had the Kirkliston Community Forum, which was basically centred around the Junction 1A works, and there was one representative who was quite vociferous about issues like mud on road and that kind of thing, noise at night time, and those issues were addressed on an ongoing basis, not only through the forum but on day-to-day level as well, with the community liaison officers who work for the contractor. That forum's now come to an end, and we've offered them, Kirkliston Community Council, the chance to sit on the South Community Forum, that being the closest geographically to them. So coming on to the South Community Forum, that seems to be, but it's certainly the hardest to manage in terms of the different people that come to that forum. Briggs come to that forum, South Queensferry Community Council and Newton Community Council. We also have representative from City of Edinburgh Council normally comes to the meeting, and occasionally we have members of the public. And I think going back to the beginning of the forums, there were an awful lot of small individual issues coming into the forums rather than trying to keep it at a strategic level, and certainly invited on an individual basis some of those members through to the site office to try and find a way of streamlining the forums to make it a bit more manageable. One of the meetings in particular started at 7 o'clock in the evening and lasted until at least 10:30 at night. Felt that was just unacceptable in terms of keeping a lot of the people at that forum for too long. It wasn't a manageable meeting, so we were trying to optimise it down to around a 2-hour meeting, which seemed an appropriate meeting. So we had some of the representatives in to try and explain that we wanted to keep things at a strategic level. As I say, that's covered in the terms of reference. So going forward, we've tried to streamline the presentation that the project team give, both the contractors and ourselves, in terms of looking back at what's happened in the last period, looking forward in what's to come, identifying particular issues for future public meetings. And David mentioned that we'd had a public meeting about the South Queensferry Junction and the project in general. We'll also have other updates around the Queensferry Junction and the diversion works there. We give the community councils and Briggs the opportunity to raise any particular issues they want to raise a week before the agendas go out. So there's an opportunity to keep things on the agenda on a strategic level. If we went down to the nth degree and we started talking about someone's got a hole in their fence, for example, we would be there forever. So we need to keep things at a reasonable level. And these issues about the A904, which affect a lot of the community, speeding, those sorts of issues are discussed at length. And I think what we've found is there's been an awful long list of action items, which is fine. And a lot of the community issues come out at the start of the meeting, and that can take at least at times 40 minutes. You know, a good chunk of the meeting. Then we get on to the progress issues, and then there's an issue for any another part of the agenda for any specific community issues which are raised. And I think we find that Briggs raised more community issues than anyone else by quite a margin.
So are you saying that you don't discourage any community group from raising issues of concern at the community forum?
Absolutely not. And if make that plain, if you look on the minutes which are published on our website, you'll see that at the start of the meeting I go through what the purpose of the meeting is for, that any community issues can be raised. If they haven't been raised as an agenda item the week before the meeting, people have a chance under any other business towards the end of the meeting to raise them. So absolutely.
I do realise that you put in the terms of reference at the beginning of the meeting, but is that why you also put in that observers are welcome to attend but shouldn't participate in the meeting?
Yeah, that's part of the terms of reference as well. That we're trying to keep it to the community representatives.
So if it's about you know, a two-way discussion with the local community, rather than being talked at, you know, there should be a balance about listening to what people say. So my understanding from the evidence presented by Briggs that there was an agreed format to the agenda set out in 2011 with Transport Scotland, where there would be an agreed 30-minute allocated for community concerns. So why was that dropped from the fourth meeting of the forum and only reinstated after the intervention of my colleague Colin Keir?
No community concerns were raised by the community for that particular meeting.
Community concerns were raised?
No one raised any of that meeting.
So my understanding is there is a unique reference number is allocated for all inquiries and complaints. Mm-hmm. Can you give us an idea of how many inquiries and complaints you've received since the project started?
We can.
I'll split it up slightly in terms of the principal contract and the M9 Junction 1A contract.
Just be helpful. In total?
Certainly. Well, I think I can give you briefly a good breakdown on it. On the principal contract, in terms of inquiries about work and work opportunities, there have been 149. Other inquiries, 317, and complaints, 79. And that's cumulatively in the period from August 2011 through till February 2013. So that's relating to the principal contract. And if we break those 79 complaints, the breakdown of those is 29 are connected with vibration and noise, 8 are connected to flooding, 9 are connected to heavy goods vehicles issues, which is the timing of them moving and the sheeting of them. 1 was to do with the project hotline, 19 to do with traffic management, the condition and speeding on roads, and 13 other. So that was a total of 79. And then on the M9 Junction 1A contract, just for comparison purposes, we had a total of 218 inquiries, and of those 218 inquiries, 52 were treated as complaints.
So how do you determine what's an inquiry or a complaint? Somebody comes along and says, my back garden's flooded, when are you going to resolve it? Is that a complaint or is that an inquiry?
That to me would be a complaint.
Right, okay. So you've had over 500 inquiries and complaints in total relating to the project, but what you're saying is at a community forum where the representatives of the local community have the opportunity to raise a complaint, they felt that there was no requirement to raise anything at all?
In one particular community forum that Lawrence was referring to, because it was, remember that under the terms and of reference of the community forums, issues are to be raised 7 days in advance. So obviously it's helpful to be notified of them in advance so we can prepare a proper response. And in that particular community forum, 7 days in advance, we'd received nothing from any local communities. And therefore, there was felt that because there hadn't been anything submitted, there was no need to have that particular item on the agenda.
Having said that, I mean, the action list had an awful lot of community issues anyway that were discussed at that particular meeting. So it wasn't like we didn't discuss any community issues. And of course, there was the any other business part at the end of the meeting where any issues could have been raised. And I'm sure there were. Right. Not looking back at that.
So on the basis that you're saying that any complaints or inquiries regarding to the project should be 7 days in advance of the meeting, would it not be helpful to issue your presentations and papers and updates to representatives of the Community Council and Briggs 7 days in advance? Then you could have more meaningful questions and discussions relating to the information, and it would maybe free up some time so that complaints that maybe came to the fore in the, you know, bear in mind you're only having these meetings every 3 months, that have come to the fore in the last few days could therefore be discussed as well.
One of the problems with that is what we've tried to do is use graphical means to explain where we are with the project. So we use aerial photos in particular so that people can actually see from above clearly what the progress is, and you can use the graphical means to point out to people, well, there's going to be a piece of traffic management from there to there in the next 3 months, or a water mains diversion at that particular location. So to actually do that in advance of the meeting is really very difficult. I'm not saying that we couldn't perhaps put something out to the public in terms of a 3-month look ahead, but whether that's actually as easy to understand as the graphical presentation, which I think we've slimmed down a lot. We must bear in mind that we've had the 3 contracts running, so there's been a lot of information to tell the public at each of these meetings. And one of the other terms of reference was that all the contractors for all 3 contracts had to come to all 3 forums. So that was another sort of burden on the time, if you like. Could I just make one other point? Was the fundamental point about contacts and inquiries to the project, which we've tried to instill in the community forum meetings, is that if there are any general day-to-day issues, people should be raising those with us directly through our email contact address or our dedicated phone line. And people tend to, I get the impression that people don't seem to want to use that facility, and it's free as well, and it's a 24-hour helpline. I'm not saying that everyone isn't aware of it, and certainly a lot of people in the communities are aware of it, but people sort of tend to get to the community forum and use that as the focus of things, whereas really, if there's an issue, we'd be much happier finding out about it there and then, and being able to deal with it, whether it's through the contractor or through ourselves, at the earliest opportunity.
And finally, Briggs has highlighted the several instances where Transport Scotland has failed to adequately respond to issues that were raised at the community forum. You know, will you look at these concerns and offer an assurance that such situations will not arise in the future?
Yes, I think we can. I mean, we'll look at that, and if there's any issues where, I mean, all these the meetings are minuted, action item lists are produced, and I personally will take an action to actually review those and make sure that we have followed up on all the actions that we should have followed up on.
Okay, thank you.
Is there a situation where people have perhaps phoned up the office in the past and felt they've not had their issue dealt with adequately, and they've then taken it to the community forum, and that seems to be the route now? I mean, I think people should phone you directly. For one thing, it'd be quicker rather than waiting, possibly up to 3 months to get it resolved through the community forum. But, have there been, I can see that if somebody has phoned up and hasn't had their issue resolved, then they could take it through the community forum. Has there been that problem in the past, perhaps?
I don't believe there has, and it's something that we also do monitor. And I mentioned the numbers of inquiries and complaints we've had. We also monitor exactly how long it takes to respond to all those inquiries and complaints. And certainly the majority of those, the large majority of them, are responded to within 5 days. So it's very unusual for anything to go longer than that. And if they do go longer than that, then we would have a look at it. The other point I would like to mention is that the community forum is only one aspect of the community reach out that we do. I mentioned the stakeholder meetings that we had in January. We also, if there are specific areas of work that are going to be going on, we notify residents by letter. For example, with the Lynn Mill Residents Association, we met with them because there was a couple of questions they'd had about the work going on in the marine work close to the South Shore. We actually set up a specific meeting with them to talk about those concerns outside the regular setup of meetings. We also go along and meet with the Port Edgar Yacht Club on a regular basis, because particularly at the start of the spring sailing season, in order that we can talk through with them what we're going to be doing, where the restricted areas are, and the specific concerns that they have as an organisation or a club, to make sure that that their concerns are being addressed. And obviously it's far more appropriate that those are dealt with directly in a separate environment rather than trying to have a catch-all set up in the community forum.
So listened to a radio piece about you having the people who had been involved in the Forth Bridge construction. I found that very moving, actually. I hope they're still going to be here to see the bridge completed, most of them, and that they'll be back with you as well. Anyway, let's move on. The committee also heard concerns that work to the north of the FRC could create tailbacks on the current bridge and as far as the M9 spur. Do you share these concerns, and if so, what are you doing to minimise the risk of them occurring?
So, certainly. I mean, this relates to the work on the Ferry Toll roundabout, which I alluded to slightly in my opening statement. We're doing a lot of work in phasing that work to try to make sure that we reduce the impact of that on the main A90, because that's the key concern that people have, obviously, with tailing back and so on. The work on the local roads is already progressing. That was due to be complete this year, and that will divert a couple of the small roads which currently go into the Ferry Toll roundabout away from it in advance of us doing the work on the main line itself. We're going to do a very detailed presentation to the local communities about just how that work is going to be phased and what the various phases of traffic management are. But one of the fundamental requirements is that we do maintain 2 lanes of traffic in each direction on the A90 throughout the duration of those works. And what that actually means is that we'll actually construct some extra temporary road surfacing to be able to divert traffic during those works. So we anticipate that the work on the main line itself at Ferry Toll will not be started at least until 2014, probably towards the middle of 2014. And in advance of that, we'll be doing a lot of pre-planning and coordination with the community to make sure that we can keep traffic flowing through that area as smoothly as possible. Always the concern you have is that even if we have the 2 lanes there, we'll have the 40-mile-an-hour speed cameras in place. The average speed journey cameras will be in place to keep the speeds down. But obviously, should there be an incident within the traffic management area, that's always the area where we have a concern. And obviously, also there we'd have our 24-hour free recovery service to make sure that any impact that was created was removed as quickly as possible. But we're certainly very conscious of those concerns, and we're working to make sure that those are absolutely minimised.
Okay, and this is not a specific FRC question, but it's a Transport Scotland question. Have the in ITS systems given you any idea of how variable speeds can help with carbon reductions? I ask that because we're currently looking at the RPP2 proposals.
I can't give you a numeric answer, but that work's ongoing to see what the actual impact is on carbon reduction. But just from its very existence, you can see that the systems that have been put in place now on Fife ITS and Junction 1A, which are operating for an hour or so most mornings, are helping to smooth the traffic down so that you don't get the stop-start movements. And that's obviously having an impact on carbon reduction and improving road safety as well.
It could be measurable.
It could be measurable, yes.
Elaine.
The update you provided for the committee indicated that there was a meeting last Thursday with Transport Scotland, CESTRANS and local authorities, and I wondered if you could tell us whether the issue of improving provision for buses at the Newbridge Junction was raised at that meeting, and if it was, whether any commitments or decisions were made in that regard.
Neither of us were actually at that meeting, and some colleagues within Transport Scotland attended that meeting. I believe it was a constructive meeting, and there's a follow-up meeting in the next month or so. I think it was agreed that some more research would be done to see how easy it would be to look at installing bus lanes on the approaches to the Newbridge Junction, which I think, as mentioned at the last committee meeting, is really the focus of the public transport strategy, and trying to improve bus provision through and around that junction. So there's a lot more work to be done before we can actually get to a stage where commitments can be made to actually do the improvement works. We need to do some homework first. I think that was the message.
You also indicate some progress on the public transport strategy objectives in your written briefing. Anything further that you would like to add to that in terms of that?
No, I mean the public transport strategy was refreshed last August, and we had a meeting in November to review that, and that was where the focus on Newbridge was taken out as a separate meeting, which I've just mentioned. The next public transport working group meeting is in May, and we'll be looking at obviously the Newbridge area again, but some of the other possible interventions and seeing how those can be taken forward. Obviously, the public transport strategy included the bus hard shoulder running schemes, which are now operational on the M90 in Fife and Junction 1A. The Halbeath Park and Ride is under construction, will be completed towards the end of this year. So there are various strands of the public transport strategy which are already taking shape.
And Adam?
Okay, gentlemen, media reports have indicated that a number of contractors involved in the Forth Replacement Crossing project have been involved in employee blacklisting. Could I ask what discussions have you had with those contractors on that particular issue?
Certainly. I think just to clarify the point that you made, there was a written question in Parliament concerning the blacklisting question, which was what organisations which have been awarded contracts by Transport Scotland or by the Scottish Government were members of the association which held this blacklist. As a result of that, Morrison Construction were named, and also FCBC. But FCBC was only named because Morrison Construction is a constituent member of FCBC. Because the actual consulting organisation which ran this blacklist actually closed down in 2009, which was before FCBC was actually formed. So the linkage between the original association and the blacklisting issue only came out through the fact that Morrison Construction had been a member of that association in the past, and obviously are a part of FCBC. However, putting that aside, that's the linkage of how the FCBC name came to be connected to the issue. Obviously, the Scottish Government is totally against the blacklisting, and it's something that we did raise with FCBC when it came up to make sure that there was absolutely no question of that happening. And certainly with the fact that we use both the Public Contract Scotland procurement site and also advertise all the job opportunities within local job centres should ensure that that does not happen.
So for the record, can you give a cast iron assurance that the project hasn't been affected by employee blacklisting and won't be?
I can give you assurance that as far as I'm aware, there is no issue of related to blacklisting on the project, and it's something we have questioned FCBC about, and they've assured us that is also the case. So
can you give us some assurance then you'll keep a watching brief on this, and this isn't just a one-off inquiry that you've made of FCBC, but you will monitor the situation?
Absolutely. It's something that we will continue to monitor throughout the project.
Just in terms of manpower, can you give us some idea of how many people are currently employed in the project, and more specifically, how many vocational training places there are? I understand that it fell a bit short of the 45 vocational training places that should be filled.
Okay. Certainly. The current update in terms of workforce is that we reached our initial peak at the end of October of around 1,200 in total on the site. That has subsequently dropped somewhat in the fact that the Fife ITS, the M9 Junction 1A and the Contact and Education contracts have been completed. So currently on the site the numbers are between 700 and 800. That will ramp up again to about the 1,200 number over the next few months as we start on the tower work and the approach viaduct work. So we expect to get back to about the 1,200 peak number later this year. But we always expected there would be a fluctuation during the progress of the job. In terms of the vocational training places, as of the 31st of January this year, so far we've delivered 46 vocational training positions, 44 professional body training places and 70 long-term unemployed positions. So those are actually all now ahead of the targets that we had. And we always thought that it might take a little time to get up to the targets that we set, because they were quite stretching targets. So we're happy that we have now reached those targets, and we continue to push the contractor very hard to make sure that they continue to achieve and beat those targets that we set.
Okay. Anyone else? Yeah, Jim?
Just come in very briefly. The statement that you made earlier that the air quality monitoring equipment had been installed was a helpful reassurance, and if it's the case that the concerns expressed by Briggs and the local community have been listened to and acted upon, I think that that is very welcome. But could you please provide clarification on when that equipment was installed? I think that would be helpful to the committee. And secondly, I just had a question on the ongoing commitment beyond the construction phase of the fourth replacement crossing. Given that, according to the Briggs written evidence received by the committee, that there's the future prospect of 93,000 vehicles passing in close proximity to the Eckland Corner, and in very close proximity to residents' properties on a daily basis, do you see an ongoing requirement for air quality monitoring? And if so, who would be responsible for that?
We would certainly look at, as part of a before and after study, to look at the benefits of the scheme. That's the sort of thing that we would certainly look at. Obviously, all the data that's being gathered through construction really concerns the construction itself. Post-construction, we can look at noise impacts and air quality impacts through monitoring basically the traffic flows that actually use the bridge in the years to come. So we would do an assessment of the air quality and noise based on traffic. There's sophisticated computer programs which can simulate the data in regard to noise, and supplemented by actual readings at strategic points. That's basically how the environmental statement's put together in the first place, using predicted traffic flows. Obviously, once we go into operation, we can actually use the actual flows, and there's a whole host of traffic recording devices on the road layout up and down the scheme, so we can monitor traffic flows post-construction. Obviously, in the Eckland part of the scheme, the main carriageway will be in a deep cutting, so all that traffic will be down as much as 7 to 9 metres below the new Queensferry junction. So the effects of noise and air pollution would be minimised. And once you come out of that cutting, as you head northwards towards the bridge, there are earth bunds and noise barriers provided right up to the bridge, and in fact the windshields which start to go over the approach viaduct are also doubled up as being noise barriers at that point as well. So the mitigation measures in the final scheme are considerable in terms of trying to mitigate the impacts of noise in particular.
But you will look at the requirement for ongoing monitoring?
Absolutely, yes. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And just ask a final question. How much has been spent in your last financial year, whenever it is, on the bridge construction?
The total expenditure for financial year 2012-13, just about to finish, we're anticipating will be £242 million.
Okay. Anyone else? Right, gentlemen, thank you very much for that session. We'll continue to monitor these community issues, and hopefully we'll see improvement when you come and see us in another 6 months. That's the end of this evidence session, and I'll briefly suspend the meeting to allow witnesses to leave the room, and after that we move into private anyway. Okay, thank you very much.